Hello everyone, Douglas here and welcome to my Doctor Who review, and today I will be reviewing Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks. This story is not the series finale yet. This story was supposed to be written by Stephen Moffat, but he was pulled to write another story, but more on that later. This story is the first story to be written by former Doctor Who script editor Helen Raynor, making her the first woman to write for the new series. And this story is the second story for the Cult of Skaro. In part 1, called Daleks in Manhattan, our cold open scene begins in New York in the 1930s. We are at New York Review, and we see that there is a show going to happen. We see Tallulah, played by Miranda Wason, and her boyfriend Laszlo, played by Ryan Cranes. We see Tallulah is getting ready for the show. We see Laszlo hears something, and something went by. We see Laszlo is investigating, and we see the creature, and it's a pig. Our opening scene begins, and we see the TARDIS lands by the Statue of Liberty. And we see the 10th Doctor, played by David Tennant, and Martha, played by Freema Agyeman, and they see the Empire State Building, and it's still in construction. We find out from the Doctor that in the newspaper, and it says, Hoovervale, mystery deepens. We see the Doctor is telling Martha about Herbert Hoover, and interesting enough, Herbert Hoover is from the state I live in, Iowa. And what is it with Russell referencing Iowa? And to be honest, has he ever been to Iowa before? We see the Doctor is telling Martha about the Wall Street crash. We are at Hoovervale. We see the leader, Solomon, played by Hugh Cheshire. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this. We see the Doctor and Martha meet Solomon. We are at the Empire State Building, and we see Mr. Diagoras, played by Eric Lauren, and we see a construction worker is complaining. We find out from Mr. Diagoras the mast must be completed tonight. We see the construction worker wants to meet Mr. Diagoras' masters, and we see him push an elevator button. A good line from Mr. Diagoras when he says, "Beyond your imagination." We see the elevator arrive, and we see Dalek, and we see the pig slaves. We see the Dalek orders the pig slaves to take the worker for the final experiment. And you might be wondering, what is the final experiment? We find out from the Dalek that the Gamma Strike has accelerated, and they need more bodies. We see the Doctor ask Solomon about the men going missing. We find out from Solomon that someone is taking them at night. We see Frank, played by Peter Parker. Oh, I mean the Amazing Spider-Man himself, Andrew Garfield. We find out from Frank that Mr. Diagoras is here. We find out from Mr. Diagoras that the job is a trip to the sewers, and there is a tunnel collapse. We see the Doctor is volunteering to go, and same thing with Martha, and a funny line from Martha when she says, "I'll kill you for this." I would if I was in that situation. We see the Doctor, Martha, Solomon, and Frank are in the sewers. We see Martha is talking to Frank. We see the Doctor notices something, and it's Dewey. We find out from the Doctor, and he is wondering why Mr. Diagoras sent them down. We see Mr. Diagoras is meeting with the construction workers. We see the Dalek plates, and they are going to be a part of something. We see the workers are picking up the Dalek plates, and we see the Dalek arrives. I love the Dalek's line when it says, "My planet is gone, destroyed in the Great War. Yet versions of this city stand throughout history. The human race always continues." Remember when the 9th Doctor says his planet is gone? But this time, we get to hear it from a Dalek. And that is what I like. And these Daleks are the Cult of Skaro. Of course they have emotions. We find out from Mr. Diagoras that he was a soldier in World War One. We see the other three Daleks who are part of the cult of Skaro. We find out from Dalek Sec that Mr. Diagoras is the best option and it wants him. We see Mr. Diagoras is taken to the lab. We see Mr. Diagoras is at the lab. We see Mr. Diagoras meets Dalek Sec. We see Dalek Sec orders the pig slaves to secure him. Back in the sewers, there is no collapsed tunnel. We see the group hear something. We see Martha notices the pig slave. We see the doctor is talking to the pig slave. We see that there are more pig slaves, and the group gets chased. We see Frank is holding the pig slaves off, and he gets dragged by them. Oh well, nice knowing you, and plus, you don't want to know what your second Spider-Man movie looked like. We see Tallulah again with a gun, and she meets the doctor, Martha and Solomon. We see Tallulah is asking what they have done with Laszlo. We find out the gun is just a prop. It would be nice if there was an orange safety tip. We see the doctor is going to scan the gooey thing. We see Solomon is going back to Hooverville. We see Tallulah is getting ready for her show. We see Tallulah is telling Martha about Laszlo. We see Solomon is telling the people of Hooverville what has happened. We see the construction workers are installing the Dalek plates. Back in the lab, we find out from Dalek Sec that he needs his flesh. We see another Dalek stops Dalek Sec, and we find out this action contradicts the Dalek imperative. I like Dalek Sec's line when it says, "But there are millions of humans and only 4 of us. If we are supreme, why are we not victorious?" The cult of Skaro was created by the Emperor for this very purpose, to imagine new ways of survival. We see another Dalek says, "But we must remain pure." We find out from Dalek Sec that their purity has led them to extinction, and they must adapt to survive. We see Dalek Faye's damaged panel, and I have that Aussie control of Dalek Faye with the damaged panel. We see Dalek Sec opens his casing and it engulfs Mr. Diagoras. We see the doctor is scanning the gooey thing. We hear Tallulah saying, "You put the devil in me." We see Martha is watching the show. We see Martha notices someone, and it is Laszlo. And we see that he became a pig slave. We see Martha is trying to get to the other side. One of my favorite scenes is when the doctor finds out where the gooey thing is from, and it is from Skaro. And he knows the Daleks are here. We see Tallulah notices Laszlo. We see Laszlo is running away. We see Martha gets kidnapped by a pig slave. We see the doctor is going back to the sewer, and Tallulah goes with him. We see Frank is alive and, oh, I thought he was dead. We see the doctor notices the shadow of the Dalek, and he hides. A good line from the doctor when he says, "No, no, no." They survive. They always survive, while I lose everything. Inside that cell, there's a creature born to hate, whose only thought is to destroy everything and everyone that isn't a Dalek too. They won't stop until it kills every human being alive. David Tennant's face is priceless, and you can tell it's the Ninth Doctor in him that hates the Daleks. We see Dalek Sec is smoking and the other Dalek is trying to stop it, but Dalek Sec refuses. We see the other Dalek administering the solution. We see the doctor is taking Tallulah back, and we see Laszlo again. We see Tallulah recognizes Laszlo. We see Laszlo is taking the doctor to the Daleks. We see Martha and Frank seize the Daleks. This is the first time Dalekanium is first mentioned since the Dalek invasion of Earth. We see the Daleks are scanning people. We find out from Laszlo that there are two groups of people, high intelligence and low intelligence. The people with the low intelligence become pig slaves, and the people with high intelligence are taken to the laboratory to become a part of the final experiment. We see the Daleks are taking the prisoners to the lab, and the Doctor sneaks into the group. We see Tallulah gets lost. We see the prisoners are in the lab, and we find out from one of the Daleks that Dalek Sec is now entering the final stages of evolution. We see the Doctor tells Martha to ask them. We see Martha ask the Daleks, and we find out that the children of Skaro must walk again. We see Dalek Sec's casing turns off, and we see something new. And I love the pig slave's reaction to this. And that is a good, horrifying face. That is just great. Props to the actor for that reaction. We see Dalek Sec is a human Dalek hybrid. And a great line when he says, I am a human Dalek. I am your future. And that is the end of part 1. In part 2, called Evolution of the Daleks, we find out from Dalek Sec that the humans will become like them, and we hear a radio, and the Doctor reveals himself. And a funny line from the Doctor when he says, hello, surprise, boo, etc. We see the Doctor is talking to Dalek Sec. I like how the Doctor asks what it feels like, because he is a human hybrid, so he would have human emotions. We see the Doctor pose a sonic screwdriver, and the radio makes a noise, and everyone escapes. We see Dalek Sec orders the Daleks to find them. We see the radio is destroyed, and we see him, and you can tell he does have human emotions. We see the two Daleks are talking about Dalek Sec, and they have doubts about him. We see the Doctor and the group are back at Hoovervale. We see the Doctor is talking to Solomon. We hear a snorting noise, and it's the pig slaves. We see the pig slaves are attacking Hoovervale. We find out the pig slaves are just the foot soldiers, and we see the Daleks are flying over Hoovervale, which was a cool shot. We see Dalek Sec is watching what is happening, and he orders the attack. We see the Daleks located the Doctor. We see Solomon is trying to reason with the Daleks, but it fails and he is killed. I like Dalek Sec's reaction, and you can tell that is one. We see the Doctor is offering the Daleks to kill him, so we see the Dalek is about to kill him, but Dalek Sec stops it. We see Dalek Sec orders the Daleks to bring the Doctor in. We see Martha wants to go with him, but the Doctor tells her to stay. We see the Doctor give Martha the psychic paper. We find out from Dalek Sec the reason why he saved the Doctor, because the future of the Daleks might depend on him. We see the Doctor is not happy, and we see Dalek Sec admits he was wrong. We find out from Dalek Sec that when they first came, they tried growing new Dalek embryos, but their flesh was too weak. We see Dalek Sec pose 2 switches, and we see a gurney descend, and we find out they stole human beings, and we see a human. We find out this is the true extent of the final experiment. We find out there is more than 1,000. We see Martha is trying to figure out why the Doctor gave her the psychic paper. We see Martha remembers about the Daleks mentioning the energy conductor. We see Martha is talking to Frank. We see Dalek Sec is showing the Doctor the plan. We find out that Dalek Sec is the genetic template. We find out that gamma radiation is from the sun. I like how Dalek Sec admits that Davros is wrong about removing emotions. I like Dalek Sec's line when he says it makes us lesser than our enemies. We find out from the Doctor that Dalek Sec wants to change everything that makes a Dalek a Dalek. We see Martha, Tallulah, and Frank are in the elevator. We see the Doctor admits that the other three Daleks wouldn't let him do it. But I think the Doctor knows they would backstab him. We see the Doctor is going to work. We see Martha, Tallulah, and Frank are at the upper levels. We see Martha is looking at the plans, and Frank notices the date that they were issued today. We see Tallulah is looking at the view of New York. I like Tallulah's line when she says, New York City. If aliens had to come to Earth, oh, no wonder they came here. We see the Doctor and the Daleks are at work. We find out from Dalek Sec that the pig slave's lifespan is limited. None survive beyond a few weeks. We see the Doctor tells Laszlo that he can't undo the changes to him. We find out from Tallulah that there is a storm coming in. In the lab, we hear the alert signal and we find out they are overriding the gene feed. And we also find out the three Daleks betray Dalek Sec. We find out the bodies will be 100% Dalek. We see the Doctor and Laszlo are running to the elevator and they made it. We see that there is something wrong with Laszlo and the Doctor can tell something is wrong. I like the Dalek's line when it says, You told us to imagine and we imagined your irrelevance. We see the Doctor and Laszlo have made it up to the upper levels and they see their friends. We see the elevator is going back and a good line from the Doctor when he says, Never waste time with a hug. We see the Doctor is going on top of the mast to remove the Dalek plates. We see the pig slaves are going after the Doctor. We see Martha and her friends are arming up. We see Laszlo collapses. We see Martha gets an idea. We see Martha and Frank are setting up the pose. We see the Doctor is trying to remove the second Dalek panel and he loses his sonic screwdriver. We see the Doctor is trying to remove it with his bare hands, but it doesn't work. We see the Doctor is hugging the mast. We see the pig slaves have arrived and then the lightning strikes the mast with the Doctor with it. We see the new army of human Daleks are awake. We see the pig slaves are dead. We see the Doctor is out. We see the Daleks are talking to their army. We see the human Daleks take arms. We see Martha finds the Doctor and she found the sonic screwdriver. We see Dalek Khan is taking command. We see the Doctor and his friends are back at the theater. We see the Doctor is sending a signal to the Daleks. We see Martha is refusing to go back to Hooverville. We see the human Daleks have arrived, and we see Sec, Thay, and Just. We see Dalek Sec is trying to plead with the Daleks not to kill him, and we see Thay and Just kill Dalek Sec. We see the Dalek orders the human Daleks to kill the Doctor, but they don't. We find out that the Doctor's DNA was in the mix of the lightning strike. We see the Dalek kills one of the humans, and the humans start attacking the Daleks. We see Daleks Thay and Just are killed. We see Dalek Khan destroys the human Daleks. We see the Doctor confronts Dalek Khan. We see the Doctor wants to help Dalek Khan, and he uses emergency temporal shift. We find out Laszlo is dying. I like the Doctor's line when he says, Oh, Tallulah with 3 L's and an H, just you watch me. What do I need? Oh, I don't know. How about a great big genetic laboratory? Look, I've got one. There's been too many deaths today. Way too many people have died. Brand new creatures and wise old men and aged old enemies. And I'm telling you right now, I am not having one more death. You got that? That one, Tallulah. Out of the way, the Doctor is in. We see the Doctor saves Laszlo. We see the Doctor and Martha walk back to the TARDIS. And that is the end. I will say, this is a classic. I loved this story as a kid, and I still love it now. I will say, I know this story received negative criticism back then, and they called it the worst Dalek story in the new series. I don't think the story didn't deserve the negative criticism back then. I will admit, this was a fascinating Dalek story. I do like the other characters in this story, and even though they are British, they do good pulling off an American accent. I will say there are shots I think that were shot in England. You can tell by the grass, it looks too English. There are some shots that were shot in New York. I do like Dalek Sec in this story, and he does go through a character arc in this story. The script by Helen Raynor is good, and the direction by James Strawn is good, and I would give this story a 10 out of 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and I will see you next time for my review of The Lazarus Experiment. And a very familiar name will be a villain in the next story, so you might be wondering, who's it gonna be? I'll see you next time.